All right, Jai Baba. Amongst my readings in spiritual literature, I came across the word chivalry, which of course is familiar in Western culture, and I find that it's defined as generosity, consideration, thoughtfulness, tolerance towards others. It is based on love for God, love for that one in the many, and steadfastness of such love in the face of suffering in the pursuit of that ideal. And this is a sentence that particularly appeals to me. It is the heroism of obedience and love, not of pride and willfulness, which is the most heroic and the most moving. The true hero needs no witnesses and no reward. He does it all so that the light of love and obedience be not impaired. And I picked out, among other things, I picked out two stories of Baba which I feel are very wonderful examples of chivalry. In 1936, Maya Baba established free medical care at Rahuri, a village in a remote rural area, and in the midst of some very wild and inaccessible country. However, word of the free treatment spread quickly, and soon up to 200 people would come each day. Many had never before had treatment from a medical doctor. At times, Maya Baba himself would help in the clinic, and such was the love and kindness that he gave to minimize the people's suffering. They would seek to have his attention before even the doctors. Such was the case of a poor elderly woman with a badly infected head wound. Her appearance was very distressing, with maggots actually embedded in the open wound. Her misery was acute, and on arrival all she would cry out was, "Maya Baba, I want Maya Baba's darshan. I want to see him before I die. Please, please call him." An urgent message was conveyed to Baba quite some distance away at Abode, and for her he came specially to the Rahuri clinic. Upon seeing her, he gently took the old woman in his embrace. With this she became absolutely quiet, and with a glow of relief came over her face, She was then gently laid down, and gazing serenely up at Baba, sighed with a sweet smile as she lay there. After half an hour, the woman was noticed to be in deep sleep with a most peaceful expression. She had entered into the sleep of death. And the other one, in the early 1930s, Gaimai had staying with her one of the young sons of her sister Manu Kerawala, whose husband was at that time in a very poorly paid job. While there, the child became critically ill with an extremely high temperature. He required constant, careful attention. During this time, Bayram Shah, that is the father, the husband of Gaimai, was due to leave on one of his important tours of factories in the central provinces. But he hesitated and agonized over leaving Gaimai alone with such a critically ill child. In the midst of his mental turmoil, Bayram Shah received a telegram from Baba saying that he would unexpectedly reach Nagpur shortly, and that Bayram could therefore leave on his tour of duty free of worry. Now it appeared that Baba was at the time on a train journey, not anywhere near Nagpur, but inexplicably he suddenly announced a change of plan, and with the Mandali changed trains for Nagpur. This incident was the turning point in Bairam's mind regarding Meher Baba, and he accepted him as a perfect master. Baba arrived at Mary Lodge with the Mandali and said to Bairam that he should now depart on his tour of duty. So Bairam left, and Baba and the men settled into the house. That day the doctor announced that the coming night would be the really critical period for the child, who must not be left alone at any time, and that ice packs and cold cloths should be constantly applied. Gaimai settled down with the boy, and Baba and his men retired for the night. In the early hours of the morning, Gaimai became more and more conscious of the need to go to the bathroom. But she dared not. She could not leave the child even for a moment in case a crisis occurred. Her discomfort grew more and more acute. Suddenly she became aware of a light coming towards her through the dark house. As it came closer, she realized it was Baba. In the light of the flashlight, he gestured to her to go to the bathroom, and he would sit with the child. Such is the God-man's love for us, his ever watchful compassion, and a beautiful example of chivalry. Yeah. What is it, in a few days' time, a week, maybe a little more than a week, on the 3rd of June, Meher Baba and the Mandali with him arrive at Avatar's Abode in 1958. It was a Tuesday. And I described that day in the afternoon, if you remember. Oh, I'm sorry, those of us were here. Yeah, on Monday, and I read the account of that day, and tried to bring out the seriousness of that visit, that how light it was, how beautifully light and loving, as though Baba was demonstrating the truth that he had planted the seed of love in Australia in 1956, and that now, 2 years later, he was saying to us, I treated you as children then. Now it's time that you grew up and took seriously what I mean by love and obedience. And that first day was a very, as I described, a very serious atmosphere was created by Baba, in which he emphasized, basically, you can't have the world and God. It's one or the other. And you can't compromise. In the world you can compromise, but you can't spiritually. Hi. And okay, the rest of the time, yes, it continued to be serious, but of course there were also wonderful lighter moments, and incidents that I recall was Wednesday morning. The next morning, Baba, remember how I described the meeting hall where we had gathered on that first day? We hadn't had time to finish the building, mm-hmm. and we had completed 2/3 of it with burlap hanging down on the side instead of the the galvanized iron covering, and there was a gap about that deep between the burlap and the ground, and as I described, it got very chilly. There was a breeze blowing. The climate of that afternoon certainly aided the seriousness of the atmosphere of that afternoon. So the next morning I got up early, and with my shovel I went and started to build up the soil to try to minimize or eliminate the gap, at least help. And I could remember, like a typical Australian workman, I was leaning on my shovel, looking towards Barbara's house. It's a little distance, about 30, 40 feet away. I was leaning on the shovel, looking at the house, and thinking, it's wonderful, God is there. It's just such a. I was thoroughly enjoying the whole the atmosphere, the scene, and suddenly Erich appears at the door, which I could see. The door is quite visible from where I was standing, and he sees me and, Bill, Francis wants you and Francis. Yep. So then I dropped the shovel, ran down to the old farmhouse which we had moved on the back of a truck down the slope to a lower part where the cooking was done, the breakfast was prepared there. And I got Francis and we came up, and that was one of those wonderful work sessions with Barbara, where he sat in his chair and we sat on the floor. Barbara gestured for us to sit, which is interesting. The men Mundley never sat. They may have when we weren't around, but they always stood. And but Barbara gestured for Francis and I to sit, and then he spoke about Avatar's Abode and what a special place it was, and that it would become a place of world pilgrimage, and that we were to form a trust, and that he and I, Francis and I, were to be on it. And he said a board of 5, and he asked us to name three others for the board, which we did. And then he inquired about it was so sort of informal. It's one of those occasions where Barbara's just, I can still see it when I'm in that room and I sit in the same spot that I sat then, so that in looking towards the chair I can visualize Barbara sitting there and nodding, and he might, questions of what will be done, whether this should be or that. Often his gesture was over the nose and the moustache. And I've also seen how on another occasion I can remember, it was again what should be done, and he went like this. You know how you purse your mouth. Sort of, what shall be done? It's so delightful, a beautiful example of how Barbara was so human. He was so God and so human. How to separate? Of course, you can't. It's one and the same. And yet, as I try to say in another talk, it's as though at times God is more predominant, and at other times man is more predominant. and I must say that the occasions when man was more predominant and more and things was informal, just lovingly informal, is the best for me. I like it. Yeah. So that was. Oh yes, he asked where the children were. He had specified that children under the age of under the age of 9 were to be kept away. But then this morning he asked where were they, and we said they were with a neighbouring young farmer couple that were happy to look after them. And he said, bring them. It was interesting, a little hint that the message, he'd given the message that afternoon before, that first day when he arrived, when he was so emphatic about loving and obeying. Don't say that you love me unless you're prepared to obey me. And having given that and emphasised it, then it was going to be from then on lighter. And the young children, one was I think 3. What was Jenny? Jenny was 4 and another one 3. Anyway, they were young. And there were again delightful occasions. There was the occasion when I don't know quite how it was, but I was walking with Barbara and Erich under the veranda of the house that we had built for him, and we came to the end of the looking out on trees and vegetation that was there, and Barbara pointed to a particular plant that had this fruit, and I said, "Yes, Barbara, they're pawpaw." And he looked at me in a very puzzled way, and then Erich said, "In India we call them papaya." But it was lovely the way Barbara looked. Where did you get that from? You know, that was the turn that we.
When the kids came, wasn't it Michael's birthday?
Yes, it was Michael's birthday. That was late. That came about. Yeah. And then at another time during that day, which was Michael's birthday, my son's birthday, and we're all gathered in the house this time. Barbara decided that the meeting hall, that half-finished meeting hall, which proved to be pretty drafty, cool, and a bit disturbing. Oh, hi. I saw the Julie, but I didn't see the two. Yeah, hi.
Morning, our ninjas.
We were gathered in the house. That was a lovely occasion too. Before transporting the planks of timber that we sat on stumps of wood into the house, Barbara's house, into the open area that we had, I was sweeping. I think another man or somebody else was also sweeping with me. But anyway, I remember sweeping, and Barbara was seated in the chair outside his room, which is at the end of the building is 80 feet long, and 20 feet was occupied with his bedroom, and he was seated just outside the door, and we were sweeping the rest prior to putting down the planks of timber again so that we could all come in and have the meeting that Barbara called for. And I was sweeping at the end, and I happened to look up to see Baba, and he blew me a kiss. Little things that one does remember. Yeah. And all right, so we're all seated, and Baba decided to whether I don't remember saying that it was Michael's birthday. I don't remember that. I don't think so. But as it happened, on his birthday, Baba decided to distribute prasad, and he was given this big bowl of sweets. It was wrapped toffee of, I can't remember, something of that sort. And okay, there were 2 rows of these planks, and as it happened, Francis was at one side of the room, at 20 feet, by the way. The building is 20 feet wide. So he was there. Baba was here, a distance of about 20 feet, and I happened to be on the other side, against the wall. So it's a sort of a triangle. And we were sitting there, and Baba said that we were to catch it, and if we didn't catch it, we had to return it to him, and he would throw it again, but it had to be caught. And so I'm sitting there as I normally do, like this. It's a common posture for me. And Baba's got the sweet, and he's looking at Francis. This is right at the beginning. And I know, I mean, you can guess what happened. He throws it. I'm looking and thinking, oh, Francis is going to have the first one. And there it was, in my hand. I didn't even move. How could he do it?
How could he not?
Yeah, it was quite incredible. Anyway, dear Michael, even though he was already playing cricket and you know, could catch balls, he didn't catch the sweet. Baba brought him a bit closer. He still missed it again. In the end, Baba put it in his hand. Yes.
How old?
7. Yes, it was. It was his 7th birthday. Yeah.
That's a pretty important birthday for a kid, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And all right. So okay, there were other occasions, but let's move on because I'm sort of anxious to honour.
This is a tour, thank you.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope it was make some sense for him. I didn't realise. Oh well. Okay, towards the end of the stay, which is the Friday, Barbara announced that he would leave on the Friday, and he directed that 4 of the Australian men, that was Francis, myself, and 2 others, Robert Rouse, John Bruford, should come down with him, travel with him. No detail. We didn't know what we were to do, but we were to travel with him back to Sydney. So okay, we did it accordingly. And in the afternoon, all right, it was lunchtime. It was after lunch, very early. If I remember rightly, it was 1 p.m., 1:30 p.m. and it was sunny. It wasn't hot or anything like that, but it was it was a day in which it was sunny, and what I remember was that Baba sat in a chair at one end of the veranda, under the veranda, and the sun was coming in. He was right in the shade, and the sun was here. Funny how I can remember it so clearly, and all the Australians were gathered. On the other side, what we had done was create a road, a sort of road.
A dirt road.
A dirt road under the veranda, so the cars could drive underneath the veranda and deposit Baba directly at his front door, and then circled round and went out again. It's a property. It's 100-acre property. I mean, it's if you follow what I mean. And the cars were there ready, departure, the luggage, and Baba then had the Australians file. No, first of all, before that, they were standing there, and Baba was seated on the chair, and he called for my father to come from the crowd, and my father, who I'd never seen bend the knee to anyone, got down on his knees and put his head in Baba's lap. Yeah, and then he went back, and at some point, sorry, it was before or after, but all the Australians filed in front of Baba and kissed his hand in farewell. And then we drove out, and we drove down to Brisbane, to the same hotel, the same place that I had booked. You remember the little cabin that I described in the grounds of the hotel in Brisbane, in the middle of the beer garden. Mm-hmm. It was ideal for Baba, except, I mean, I thought it was ideal, and Baba was very sweet and said it was not ideal, but satisfactory. And what happened was, I didn't realise, but in the middle of the night, near this cabin, this cottage, there was a trapdoor, and beer barrels were rolled down that into the cellar. Poor Baba. Yeah. So his night was disturbed, early hours of the morning. Yeah. Yeah, but I had no idea. I should have. I wasn't that accustomed to.
Well, sometimes you just don't know what the question is.
No. Anyway, so we returned to that hotel, and Baba retired, and I drove Adi Senior to a store, and we bought it must have been prunes for Baba's breakfast, mm-hmm. in case there weren't any in the hotel, because that was in the night. In the evening, I can remember having a meal, and Adi Senior joined us in that night, and the only thing I remember of whatever talk he gave, it's appalling how little I remember of the words. I can remember scenes, but I don't remember often what was said. Anyway, I do remember Adi Senior emphasising about dying before death, yeah, which sort of registered. Yeah. Anyway, so in the morning I got up early, 5 a.m. Baba had said we would leave early in the morning. I got up and started. I went down to the kitchen and put the prunes in a pot. I'm no cook, but I sort of can do certain basic things. And by the time, you know, getting the tray and so forth, getting ready, the night porter, the night watchman, if you like, the night porter had come in, and so the other Australians and the other Mandalay members, not Erich, had come. Oh, Erich might have come at the end. Anyway, we were all there. In other words, about 8 of us, milling around on this one pot of prunes being prepared for Barbara's breakfast. And the night porter said, "Gosh, he must be somebody important." And I said, "Oh yeah, it's the highest of the high," which passed over his head. Yeah. Anyway, so that was taken by Erich. Erich must have come and collected it. And from then on, I quietly stewed about it. Did I put sugar in with the prune? Was I meant to put sugar in? It was sort of agonising. And well, the prune, there were plenty of, I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't know. They just disappeared. I wasn't, you know, not there. They would Erich would take them to the little cottage, which was, as I said, a little distance from the main building. And okay, we drive to the airport, and as I said, it was an airport in those days, a country airport. There was no security. There was no formality, no checking in and all the rest of it. We arrived there, and we gathered in the big hangar in a little group near the door which would lead to the tarmac. And Barbara sat and we stood around, and Barbara then directed that I should go and buy the morning paper. So the only paper was the Brisbane one, which I bought, and Barbara then gestured that I was to read to him. And I looked at this paper. I mean, it was Brisbane in those days was just an overgrown country town, and there was, as far as I could see, there wasn't one item that would possibly be of interest. In local news, a robbery at a store, the dog biting a man or something. There were various articles, and I hesitate. I'm looking, I can't see, and Barbara just takes the paper away from me and gives it to Erich. Those actions were so wonderful, that sort of decisive action of his. So, no mucking around. And he gives it, and Erich then reads the headlines. So I knew then how it was done with Barbara. You read the headlines, and then Barbara would indicate if he wanted to hear that particular article. And that was a scene that I remember so clearly. And then we boarded the plane, and on the plane again breakfast was served, and Barbara passed along his packet of cornflakes to me. And I thought, oh, perhaps he forgives me if I didn't put sugar in the prunes. That was my immediate thought. Whether it was so, I don't know. Anyway, we get to Sydney. We disembark. We come out on the on the pavement of the outside the terminal, and it was as though Barbara himself was thinking, what will we do now, and said, let's go to Beacon Hill House, as though it had just thought of it, he'd just thought of it. And so we left the luggage basically at the airport. We got into 2 taxis, and we then travelled a distance of about 15 miles from the airport to Beacon Hill, the house, and we pulled up. We pulled up on the dirt road that we had created. It was still an undeveloped area. After that, it developed quickly. There were a few houses, but not near us. And we pulled up, and there's it would have been certainly 30 feet from the taxi to the front door of the house. 20, perhaps 25, 30 feet. And and I got out quickly in order to go to the house and open up. And I'm halfway there, and I suddenly realised I haven't got a key. It was no thought of having a key. I had no idea that we were going to end up there. And lo and behold, beloved Baba had got out of the taxi himself and had walked unaided. This is what hits me, and the ground was uneven. I'm not saying that there was potholes or anything, but it wasn't an even pavement. And Baba came alongside, and I'm embarrassed. I can't think. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I haven't got a key. But at the same time, as it were, we both walked. And the next thing I know, I then say to Baba, I haven't got the key to the house. And Baba, as I've said, is standing on the doorstep that we had created in front of a locked door, and I didn't have the key. I'm sure it was most significant. I hope it's not. I hope it doesn't indicate the rest of my of my existence. Anyway, I said, "Oh, Baba, maybe one of the windows is open." These are the thoughts that come, and I went to the first ones, which were 4 windows into the kitchen. They were each window was about that long and about that deep, quite narrow. But there were two and two, and as it happened, 3 were locked. Well, I tried those at the other side. This one, the one was actually open. It hadn't been locked by Joan, and in leaving the house with the children to travel up to Brisbane and Avatar's Abode to be with Baba, I had been there for the last 3 to 4 months helping. And okay, so I clambered up on a little table that we had there, a stone table that Francis had made. I clambered up and went head first through the window. Being thin, I was able to get through and fell over the sink onto the floor because I had no control. And then came round hurriedly to the front door and opened up for Baba, and then led him into the room, which of course he was familiar with, the big room in which he had his bed was there. That was the room that we had our meetings with him in 1956, and that room at 30 by 20. It's a lovely room, entirely of rock, sandstone, cut by Francis with help from some stonemason, and I did some help, but not that I was built as a stonemason, but I helped somewhat. And that was the beginning of a day, a wonderful day with Barbara. Again, that whole day until we left in the evening to catch the India flight at 10 p.m. that evening, and it was that lovely time when, as I've said, when the man side was more apparent, more visible, or more experienced more. He sat in the one easy chair that we had, and we had a pink eiderdown, a bed cover, quilted bed cover over him. I remember him sitting there against the wall, and we were all grouped again in various positions around around the room, and a radiator was put there for warmth. It was the beginning of winter. And
what about the key?
Oh yes, the key, that's right. Well, Barber seats himself in this chair. We come into the room, and of course I'm still agitated, wondering, but I should have the key. I'm the householder. I'm conscious of being very remiss, and I go to my desk, looking to see if there was a key on the desk. Why should I bother? We're already in the house, but it's on my mind.
You're embarrassed.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed. And and all of a sudden, I say to Barbara's a little distance from me, against the wall, against the other side of the room, and I'm here at my desk, and I said, "Oh, Barbara, maybe the key has fallen down through this the trapdoor that we had. We cut out a section. Francis and I cut out a section of the flooring so that we could go down. When we did it in the 50s, it was a vague idea of an air raid shelter in case there were. It was a disturbing time politically, and it's of course open one end, and as I said, it was an undeveloped area, and there were snakes. There was no question. Good 5-foot brown snakes, which are thoroughly poisonous, and I was petrified of snakes. I didn't even like to look at them. I was petrified for whatever reason, and while I'm saying this, I'm saying, Barbara, maybe the key's fallen down. I'm thinking, at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, why am I saying this? I don't want to go down there. God only knows what's down there. And Barbara nods. So I thought, well, okay. So I turned from gesturing where it was. I turned back to my desk to get something to lever it up, and Barbara clapped, and I look at Barbara, and he gestured cancelled, and I just thought, okay. I mean, it never. Of course, I had no idea of the significance of what had happened, but it turned out that little episode cured my fear of snakes, and that when it turned out that I was directed, and I naturally helped to develop Avatar's Abode, which was a much more undeveloped area. There were plenty of snakes. You turn over a stone and there'd be ones curled up, and I found that I'd lost my fear of snakes. And I killed many and carted many away, and yeah. Isn't that amazing? All because I just did what I moved to do what he wanted me to do.
You were willing.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stories of
What happened to the key?
where people not obeyed and people who have obeyed. There are many interesting stories. Anyway, the key, of course, I'd never found the key, was with Jane, who came down later. So that was that. But the rest of the day was that wonderful day. And it culminated, you could say, I suppose I'm getting on in time.
No,
am
you're
I?
fine.
Am I?
We got 15 minutes.
Oh, good. Oh, good. All right. So, and it was one of those days, as I said, Barbara was at home. It was so different. The atmosphere immediately, once and all the men Mundley came in, and the other Australians, and we all grouped ourselves round, and Barbara gestured that we could sit. And there was an occasion where Barbara gestured to Francis, "Have you got any translations of Hafiz?" And yes, we did. And Francis got what we did have, and read a bit. And Barbara said, "No, it wasn't a good translation." That sort of thing, very casual. There was there was a Barbara gestured about getting a soda drink, a bottle, what you would call 7-Up, but in Australia it's lemonade.
It's weird.
Lemonade.
It is not lemonade, it is 7-Up, but they call it lemonade.
Yeah, well, yes. Anyway, the thing is that Barbara wanted that a drink with, how would you, well...
Fizzy.
Fizzy.
Yeah,
But whatever it was, I went off and I went to the local, there was a garage close by, and they had drinks, and I got a bottle and brought it, and the glass was poured for him, and I was a bit intrigued because, yes, all right, it was cold, so naturally it was put in front of the radiator to warm, but the glass was poured, and so by the time Barbara had it, it was flat. I mean, to me there was no. But anyway, that's what happened. And then at another point, Barbara gestured, "How are we going to get back to the airport?" And immediately I remembered. I said, "Oh, Barbara, the car is available," and that was the car that I had driven him in 1956. And of course, the very thought of being able to drive him again, oh man! So Barbara looks at me, and I've got my fingers crossed because I've been away for 4 months, and God only knows what the state of the car was, but I was saying yes. I mean, I was just hoping to God that everything would be all right. And Barbara looked at me very suspiciously. I mean, he looked at me as though, "Are you telling me the truth?" or something. Anyway, the moment passed. Barbara we went on. And there was, I can't tell you the sequence, but for example, he pointed to a photograph that we had of him, an early photograph taken in the 1920s. And he said, "Yeah, look," and he gestured towards the photograph and said, "Pendu is getting old, after the accident he's getting old," and he reminisces about the old days. See, we're nodding as though Penn do. The next thing we know, Barbara's reminiscing about the old days. Oh, what it was like. But you know, he said, you know, in the early days, I walked so fast that the Mundley had to have bicycles to keep up with me. Apparently, that was so at times. And even in '54, when I saw him walk, God, when he walked swiftly, and he was then 60 years of age. Yeah, and that. And there was talk which I can't remember about Mount Abu, about the seclusion there. But it was interesting, the Baba reminiscing, and then at one point he gestured about the house. And the house that Francis and I had built. Now Francis had built. I contributed, I mean, in the sense of finance, whatever pay I was getting was going into the house, and I did help, but Barbara very sweetly talked about how happy he was in the house that Francis and I had built. But it was Francis, absolutely, in the sense it was his original concept. He got the land through the Baron. The Baron paid for the land. He worked under a stonemason in order to learn stonemasonry, and he started building a house, and particularly that room that Baba lived in for those days, 30 by 20 of stone, in the hope that Baba would come. That was his concept, and how wonderful.
That would be a great name for the book you're going to write. The house that Francis and I built.
I doubt that.
And so, okay, the morning passes. Oh, that's right. Another interesting little episode was I was still in the army at that stage. I was a captain. I was a psychologist. I had joined the army for 5 years, only in order. Sorry. Only. Oh, wait till I have a drink. Only in order to get to Sydney, and that my army cap was still on the desk. It was nearing the end of the 5-year period, but the hat was there, and Barbara spotted and pointed to it. What's that? He was seated, 15 feet away. The desk was there at one side of the room, and Barbara was seated at the other. I can see him there, just against the wall, near the door. And Barbara gestured, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, Barbara, I'm a psychologist in the army, and I know I studied psychology, but I don't regard myself as one, even though I'm employed."
Do you think you need some more water?
Oh, God, I'm sorry. This is mucking up the film, isn't it?
Not really.
Ignore the film.
Yeah, that's right. Those millions can wait.
And Barbara gestured, "Take my name before each interview." And so that I did, and with that blessing from him, from then on, I would refer to myself as a psychologist, even though I knew darn well I wasn't. Not in the real sense of the word. Not in the real sense. I'm sorry, I should add that.
But in the perfectly legal sense. I
But
mean,
in the legal
God,
sense,
you're
I
great.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and of course, that when I thought about it, I thought before each interview, and then I realised that I was constantly meeting people. It wasn't just interviews. It was it was an indication how we should take his name before everything we do, before we meet anyone, before, and I try to develop the habit of in answering the phone I would think to myself, Barbara, as it were. But how interesting but it's taken me so long to cotton on to the implications of those simple gestures that Barbara gave us, those simple directions. And it's the same with statements that Barbara's made. How frequently, don't worry is probably the two words that Barbara's used more than any other words in the whole of his utterances. And what a challenge it is. Why don't we, and that's again, I think to myself, isn't it time that I actually took this seriously? Barbara says, don't worry, why don't I obey it? And my mind immediately worries about the fact that I can't. That's how the mind is, and yet it is something which we should, I see, take to heart and at least try to imbibe that into our being. Anyway, so okay. It comes near. We were just there, and Barbara suddenly gestured, "What about lunch?" So he directed that one of the Australians, Robert, with one of the Mundali, I think it was Adi Senior. I don't know. It may have been Narriman. But anyway, the two of them went off, and getting what Barbara had ordered, a piece of fish for each, cheese and bread. And the cheese was that they got was a quarter.
You can continue this next time if your voice is...
No, it's what's right. Oh.
You know what I mean?
You want the cheese.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. The cheese was a quarter of a ball of cheese. You know the big balls of cheese? Well, this was a quarter, and a loaf of cut bread, and a piece of fish for each. And so, okay, it arrived, and we go into the kitchen. Now, the kitchen in those days, I've enlarged it since then, but it was 9 foot by 9. And Barbara sat on the wooden kitchen chair, one of the kitchen chairs that we had in the passageway that led from the kitchen to a bathroom that was next door. And on his right was this small table that we had that we used to eat at. It was small, but it was big enough for the family, myself and Joan and the 3 children. And that table, and then again in the corner was a little a handmade little stand that had the kerosene stove that we used for cooking in those days. Yes, it was pretty primitive. But yeah, anyway, that's another story. And I started. I got the stove going, and with direction from Francis. Again, I'm no cook, but I could put a piece of fish on the pan. I first of all, as Francis directed, I put flour on each side, turn it, put flour in, and then put it in the pan, and then as each piece was cooked, I put it on a plate and I passed it I'm here, and I passed it to Barbara on my left on the table, and Barbara then cut a hunk of the cheese. There was no finesse about it. He just got the knife and cut a piece and slapped it on the table, on the desk, on the plate, and a piece of bread, and then handed it to each one. And that room, as it happened, although it was winter, the sun being low, it was coming in the window. Of course, we're down under, so it was the north. It was going across the north, and the sun was coming in, and it was warm, and I'll never forget the atmosphere that had, where Barbara handed out a plate to each one, and we ate with our fingers the fish, cheese.
At the same time, he was
And
the loaves and the fishes.
yes, and that was when, of course, I was the last because I was cooking, and I was conscious that the others were all finishing, and so I tried to eat more hurriedly, but I was having difficulty, and Barbara suddenly stopped me, gestured towards me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, Barbara, I have some teeth missing in my lower jaw." And he said, "Get false teeth." So that's those famous false teeth. I was so thrilled at the idea of getting false teeth directed by God. And with any sort of excuse, I would whip them out and tell people, "Hey," I don't mean strangers, I mean people that I knew, but I delighted in telling the story of how God told me to get false teeth. Yeah. And all right, the lunch, it was wonderful, and the lunch passed, and then in the afternoon again the question of the car came up. And again, Barbara said, "All right, we'll go down and have a look at it." See, yeah, and again, it's an uneven path, it's a slope, there are steps.
Yeah.
I mean, Barbara is, as I pointed out in previous talks, how he was suffering in that time after the second car accident, and how difficult it was for him to walk. He needed that sort of support. And yet he walked down, and of course Eric gave him whatever support could be, but there are certain narrow section. I can't describe it, but anyway, despite the difficulty, he walked down there, and we came into the large double garage that we had built, which served a number of purposes, but it had the car. And it was so funny when you think of it. We all stood and looked at the car. I mean, one wonders sort of, what's the point? And yet, we were with Barbara. So Barbara looked at the car, gestured, and he gestured again. He looked at me, and I said, "Barbara, I'm sure it'll be okay." He looked very doubtful, and then said, "All right." But the interesting thing was, the significant part was that he, as we then turned round in order to return back to the house, which is up a slope, as I said, it's about walking from the front door down. It would be a good 30, 40 feet to the door.
And steps.
And there are steps.
That's what's hard.
And sandstone.
Not wide.
Yeah, and and he turns to walk back, and just before the door, for some reason, who knows, prompted by Barbara. I don't know. I don't understand. I wouldn't know. But unexpectedly, I said, "Oh, Barbara, I've got in mind. My father is about to retire, and I have in mind converting this garage into a house. Enlarging and converting it, enlarging it into a house." And Barbara went like this, "Yes," most emphatically. And so that's what happened, and that's where my youngest daughter and her husband with the 2 grandchildren live, or the grandchildren have gone, but that house is occupied, and of course that also meant that it can look after the main house, which is a place of pilgrimage now, not a family home. Yeah.
And build a car.
Oh, the car, yes. Fortunately, with the help of the others, we were able to push it out of the garage. Of course, it couldn't start, and fortunately, I didn't realise. But I must have had that in mind because it was a gear change, which meant that I could push it out. The road sloped, so I was able to put it onto the road and jump in, put it into gear, and it started. The tyres were so flat I think there was hardly any air in it, but it got to the airport. I drove Barbara again. I loved it, and then it drove back, and that was the last time it went.
Ever used.
Yeah, that was it. Yay, Barbara.
Hey, Bill.